Hi folks, welcome back to the Beardsley Doctrine in the next leg of the journey of the American Death March. We left off at the end of Phase 3. Things are starting to look pretty bleak for our country, but that didn't seem to deter many from willingly marching on. Whether it was due to ignorance or apathy or who knows, but we did march on right into Phase 4. I call Phase 4 the great failure because by the time we get to the end of it, the damage that's been inflicted upon our country is so great, even those of us that were too busy to pay attention before are beginning to see the obvious failed direction of our country. What's unique about Phase 4 is that it's in the present. For all the other phases, we could easily blame the lack of action on other people, but not anymore. We're in the game now. But how much do we really know about the present policies of our country? Are you aware of the damage that's being inflicted upon your children? Or have you been fooled by the fictitious grand tales of our successes? Remember back in Article 6, I showed the roulette table for Part 1. It was titled, Will You Be Fooled Again? I discussed at length how the illusion of choice is created in our political system to make it seem like you're playing roulette, to make it seem like you have a choice. But it isn't like roulette at all. Because in the game of roulette, you have a real choice. You can pick black or red, and one of those colors wins 97% of the time. But in the game that gets played on you, you have to pick blue or red. But you lose every time, regardless of what color you pick. But in spite of all the losing, many Americans somehow haven't noticed. We'll see if you notice this trend that you're losing every time, regardless of who you voted for. And it shouldn't be hard. Because even though the government and the media, they trumpet fictitious win after fictitious win every night on the TV and urge you to take a victory lap, it's not winning at all. And Phase 4 continued the trend of new records of failure for our country. Record job loss, record welfare costs, record trade deficits, record tax payments, record illegal immigration. Granted, they are records, just not the type that you celebrate. Unfortunately, marching through Phase 4 is particularly long because if you've only been listening to the government and the media during your life, you've missed out on all the important information that you needed to know. So it'll take some time to condense the relevant information of these last 30 years into a brief summary. I know how busy we all are, so I'll break Phase 4 down into 2 manageable sessions. But before we start, let me explain why 1990 was chosen as the point to go from Phase 3 to Phase 4. What was unique about 1990? When we concluded last, I talked about a new and improved weapon that would be used against us with terrible consequences in Phase 4. Did anyone guess what that was? What it was the destruction of our manufacturing sector. The selling off of America's opportunity to work and provide for themselves and remain free and independent. Forget the last 24 years of zero job growth that frustrated me during the end of Phase 3. Remember this? How despite the fact that our population grew by 51 million people, we didn't add a single manufacturing job over a 24-year period, and naturally our independence suffered as our trade surplus turned into a $100 billion trade deficit. But in Phase 4, zero job growth isn't a fast enough decline for those perpetrating this crime against us. And instead of zero job growth, we lose jobs due to the wholesale destruction of our manufacturing industries by the selling off of our good-paying and good-benefit jobs to the highest foreign bidder. Not a few jobs, but millions of jobs. Take a look for yourselves. Shown in yellow, manufacturing jobs start to decline in 1990 and begin to plummet by 2001. This loss of jobs destines millions to poverty, and it weakens America and makes us dependent upon others for our own survival. This job loss in Phase 4, shown in red, is due to the selling off of those 6 million of yours and your children's jobs. And it crushes the hope of our children having a better life than we had. America is built upon independence, but our government's reckless policies have us beholden to foreign countries now just to have life's basic needs. And the use of this weapon is so destructive to our freedom and our future that this turning point merits the beginning of a new phase. But this policy was also coupled with a doubling down on all the other failed policies that had already been creating awful consequences for our families and our future up to this point. These betrayals guarantee the destruction of free, independent Americans and inevitably sets us on a clear path of destruction of our country. And although the consequences of this betrayal are ignored by the government and the media, as Phase 4 progresses, even many of those people that during Phase 3 who were taking victory laps, patting themselves on the back, they start to realize things aren't all as they seem. But will enough people see through this deception in time? Let's see how much you realized during the last 30 years. So let's take a look at Phase 4. Free tax-paying and independent Americans continue to shrink in number. Part of it due to the sustained high taxes that continue to rob Americans of the fruits of their hard labor. These high taxes continue to transfer the wealth of the people to the government and their friends. Look at the red box. How little wealth and power regular Americans have now. It wasn't that long ago Americans still had wealth and power in their own country, but now Americans have transferred all their money through high taxes to the government and have little left to support their own family. And this loss of wealth continues to turn once proud, hard-working Americans into wards of the state on welfare, as shown by the highlighted red circle. Regular working Americans, although it didn't seem possible at the end of Phase 3, after a short decrease, they are paying even a higher percentage of all the taxes paid to the government, and now money from working Americans fund almost 80% of all the taxes. Phase 4 has working Americans setting a new record, the wrong kind of record though, for the percentage of taxes that they're paying. Working Americans pay almost all of it now. Did you know that, or is this another inconvenient truth that's been hidden from you? But many other once-free Americans were also lost due to their ability to find a job that will allow them to support their family because their jobs are sold off to the highest foreign bidders. Like we discussed, after 24 years of zero job growth in Phase 3 due to these treacherous policies, during Phase 4 is when our government accelerated the selling off of our jobs to foreign countries. We lost 6 million jobs, 33% of all the manufacturing jobs in our country so far in Phase 4. Even though our population grew by another 35%, or 80 million people. Here's the population increase compared to the manufacturing jobs since 1970. It's unbelievable. Our jobs should have grown by 10 million during this time, as shown in blue, but instead, they dropped by 6 million jobs, shown in red, and we're missing 16 million jobs as a result. And of course, as our manufacturing jobs go down, our trade deficit gets worse. Our trade deficit was already, we'd set a record worst at $100 billion by the end of Phase 3. Now it's horrific at $859 billion, almost $1 trillion. Of course, another kind of record of the losing kind. It's already dropped almost $800 billion so far in Phase 4. Our trade deficit's almost at $1 trillion, and you'd have to add up the next worst 73 trade deficit countries in the world to equal our trade deficit. And we had a positive trade balance for almost every year for the last 100 years, till the disastrous policies of Phase 3 created a trade deficit in 72. We've had a worsening trade deficit every year since 1976. You might be asking, how hard is it for a country to have a positive trade balance? Countries with a positive trade balance must be among the most technologically advanced countries in the world. So who are the best of the best countries whose governments have figured out how to lead their country in a way that their citizens actually have good jobs and can provide for their family? Here they are. Take a good look at this list of countries. Some of them you may have never even heard of, and others you probably never considered manufacturing powerhouses. But somehow, they are able to produce and export more goods than they have to import. But in America, we can't. Positive, you have to take a good look at it. Now, I know our government media think it's racist to believe in American exceptionalism, to believe that our country's special. But they're wrong on this issue like so many other ones. America is special, and I know we can do better than this. But they want you to believe that we can't. They want you to believe we truly are the worst of the worst. And on a lot of issues like this one, because of their leadership, we actually are the worst. We are dead last and have the worst trade deficit of any country in the world, even though we invented a lot of these goods and used to be a world leader in their manufacturing. Yet, today we are the worst, and not by little, but by miles. But not due to mine or your efforts, but rather theirs. They also want you to believe that this amount of trade deficit is normal, that the loss of jobs and the dismal trade deficit, it's the outcome of progress or globalism or whatever other crap they try to feed you. But that's a lie. Just to make sure you understand that you understand how deep this betrayal or sheer incompetence is by our leaders, I took the time to put this graph to show how bad we are. Here I listed the trade balances of every country in the world that report their trade. All 131 countries. Here are the top 7 countries with the larger green marker. China, Germany, Ireland, Russia, Singapore, Switzerland, and the Netherlands. China is the best with a $459 billion trade surplus. Now here's the rest of the world with gold markers in the gold box that hover close to a zero trade balance. But where's America? America isn't in the gold box. Here's America, the worst of the worst, with an $859 billion trade deficit. And of course, this is another new record of the wrong kind. That's why it takes the next 73 worst countries in the world to equal how bad we are. And not to rub salt in our wounds, but there's only 75 other countries in the whole world with a negative trade balance deficit, and it takes almost all of them to equal how bad we are. And no other country in the world is even close to this level of incompetence. Take a look, no one. No other government has sacrificed the livelihoods of millions of their citizens except our government. This isn't due to free markets, it's due to betrayal. And I hope this gives you a better understanding of how it would be impossible to be this bad compared to the rest of the world unless it was done on purpose. I wonder how many of you knew how bad it really was in the awful position that we're leaving our children in. Now, how could you possibly hide this level of misery and incompetence for the American people without us knowing? With a lot of help from the media, and with more debt, and with more welfare, you can cover up a lot of failure, but only for so long. So naturally, as our trade balance and good manufacturing jobs go down in blue, this forces hardworking Americans to the welfare rolls, and welfare spending goes up in yellow. But like many other Americans, independence was lost when they can no longer support themselves and be free due to excessive illegal and legal immigration in our American last refugee policies. This crazy immigration policy, it created so much cheap labor willing to work for pay that's too low for Americans to survive on, that many businesses chose this cheap labor so they can make even more money. And they replace these Americans in these jobs with these people. And this excessive labor stagnated real wages to the point that many wages aren't sufficient anymore to support a family in our country. These policies hurt all Americans, but minorities in particular are the biggest victims of this policy. They needed these opportunities to work their way out of poverty. But because low-skilled migrants flooded into our country, this created so much competition for the fleeting opportunity and jobs left in our country, many never got the chance. And finally, many Americans lost their independence due to companies implementing corporate welfare schemes where companies pay so little that they force their workers to require taxpayer-funded welfare just to survive so that their companies can make even more money. And this is shown by the ever-increasing corporate wealth in the red box. Free independent taxpayers have diminished so fast that deficit spending is the only way to keep this charade going. Debt has ballooned to unheard of levels because there aren't even close to enough taxpayers anymore to support all the wars, corruption, welfare, and bought vote schemes that our government engages in. Take a look at how our debt has continued to skyrocket during Phase 4. These are inflation-adjusted 2012 dollars that clearly show the financial betrayal of our country starting in Phase 2 in 1913. In the 47 years of Phase 2, debt went up 40 times to $1.7 trillion. Then tripled in the shorter 30-year Phase 3 and went up another $3 trillion. And now in Phase 4, debt's been taken to a new level of incompetence and negligence. Debt in just 30 years has increased almost 5 times and went up almost $20 trillion. The national debt stands at $32 trillion, and of course, this is another new record worst. Every American worker now owes about $200,000 towards the debt, and if your wife works, make it $400,000. I don't know if you knew you were on the hook for this $400K due to this reckless spending. But either you're going to pay or you're going to pass that debt on to your children instead and destroy their future. I'd hate to think you've been unaware that your inaction has allowed this group to rob your children of their future. But it has. All of our inaction has. But even though we're all living through phase 4, most people don't understand the compromised position that we're in. And if interest rates continue to stay high, and the average interest rate on the government debt averages 3%, the interest payment alone each year will consume almost $1 trillion, 62% of all the income taxes that Americans pay. That's only interest. And in welfare, and it's game over. Welfare and interest alone will consume $500 billion more money than every American pays in taxes. There won't be much of anything left to support the country. The worst part is that a lot of this debt payment is fictitious debt on money that was created out of thin air. You pay interest payments with your labor on money that doesn't even exist. It was just printed on a press, but you pay for it, though, with real money that you worked for. Our position is so precarious, only someone devoid of reason or too cowardly to face the facts can't see it at this point. So as free independent taxpayers barely exist on life support, let's see how in phase 4 how it's treating our government and their friends. Looks like the government and their friends are doing even better. Look at all the money they possess now. With the power that they have, they command you to stay at home and you do it. They tell you to abandon your loved ones so that they can die alone in the hospital, and your loved ones get abandoned and they die all alone. They take away your God-given and constitutional right to free speech. It's done. They take away your God-given and constitutional protected right to defend your family, and it's gone. They have the power now to supersede God and confiscate the rights that God gave you. And the amazing part of it all, grown men go along like the little kids being scolded by their parents. It's a sad sight to watch people trade their dignity and pride to gain the acceptance of a golden calf. But sadly, we see it every day. It's also hard to believe that for the majority of our country's existence, the government and friends only possess this much wealth and power. But now they control almost all of it. Now, how did they get it all? Your taxes, debt that you have to pay back, and profits from endless foreign wars that you pay for with the lives of your children and your hard labor. But we haven't talked a lot about the actual cost of these endless wars, other than they're very costly. Let's take a minute to do that. Even though we're $32 trillion in debt, our government still managed to spend almost $800 billion last year in defense, even though there hasn't been a war in our country for over 100 years. Take a look at this graph. Use the total of the spending of the next 12 highest defense spending countries in the world to total our spending each year. Look at the list. China, India, Russia, UK, Germany, Japan, South Korea, Saudi Arabia, Australia, Italy, Canada, and France. You have to total up all of these countries just to equal ours. You can go without a job, food, health care, but the government can take $800 billion of your tax money to protect the borders of other countries, but not our own. It's disgraceful. All the problems in our country, but we invest our money in foreign wars rather than our own citizens. And during phase 4, it's not any different than the last two phases. Iraq War I, Iraq War II, Afghanistan. Hundreds of billions of dollars, tens of thousands of lives and casualties, and 30 more years of consecutive phase 4 wars to sacrifice our sons and daughters. And as soon as one ends, we somehow find another war to fight somewhere in the world, using the phony cry that we have to protect freedom. And that it's our obligation. Crazy. It's our obligation to protect other countries' borders, other countries' citizens, and other countries' jobs, but not our own. But regardless of how many times this phony war cry for freedom gets repeated, Americans fall for it again. Even now, right now, we just squandered over $100 billion of our money and soon to be our sons and daughters' lives on another foreign war with no relevance to America or to our freedom, other than it's another war for profit scheme at your expense. How long will you continue to fall for this nonsense and sit idle while they take your money, and send your sons and daughters off to die in these foreign war schemes? I hope not much longer. Now let's stop here for this session. That seems like enough depressing information for one sitting to me. But if you think that record job loss, record high taxes for the American worker, record worst trade deficit, record debt, record defense spending to protect other countries' border citizens and jobs, but not our own, was the extent of the failure in Phase 4, you're wrong. Unfortunately, there's a lot more to come in Phase 4 if you can bear the truth of it. There's still a whole host of new all-time worst for our country that we haven't discussed yet. So don't bail out on me now. I understand the burden of knowing the truth can be heavy. But if not for us to bear it and spread the truth, who? If not now to stop the march, when? I'll see you next time.